So let's dive into the actual meat of this conversation here. There we go. So to get started with things, tell us about your current business, being Ikon, and what it is that you actually do on a day-to-day basis.
So I'm an executive coach, as Katie was saying, with a company called Ikon Coaching, which I started about 15 years ago. The question of what we do is always nearly impossible to answer because the kind of coaching we do, what we like to say is we take how off the table. Lots of people walk in, they're asking me a how question. How do I start a business? How do I grow a business? How do I? And the reason people get stuck is not because they don't know how. YouTube literally has all the answers to that question. So we don't answer that question. So what questions do we answer? I don't know. That's a how question.
You answer, you give stories of dragons.
So I can go there if you want to.
I don't know. Well, if we need to fill more time, we'll go to the dragon story. Ask this mountain about dragons.
Here's the great thing about coaching is it's a journey alongside somebody, and we help leaders and their companies who are in transition. And when you're in a transition, what's happening is you have a worldview, a set of things that work for you, things that got you there, and it's encapsulated in what you know, how your mind works, what you believe is possible, how your imagination works. And when you get stuck, you are largely stuck because that's not effective anymore. It's not that it's wrong, it's that you have to go through a transition to be able to think differently, to behave differently, to see yourself differently. So a lot of what we're doing is helping people expand their imaginations and believe things that they didn't think were possible are possible. To do that, you actually have to often go into things that are taboos in their minds. You have to go places that they're not willing to go. We call it the dark forest, and there's dragons out there and metaphors. And
it's true. There are dragons. And gold.
Dragons are real. Yeah. So anyway, that's a lot of what coaching is. A lot of people are going to try to package up coaching into the I will show you how to and then you will and you'll find success and all that kind of stuff. And that's a style and it's fine and it's okay. But if you really want to walk through a transition powerfully, that's not going to work. So we don't answer how questions.
Totally. So with that, I'd also forgotten to mention there will be Q&A with you guys once Kirk and I are done talking. So if you have any questions, write those down. You'll get a chance to ask those. So one of the big things we're talking about tonight, is resiliency. What is resiliency? Why is that important? Things of that nature. And then also mindset specifically in business. So let's tackle that resiliency idea. How is it that you would define resiliency specifically in that business arena?
So the thing about resiliency is it is the ability and its increased ability to face things that are damaging, wounding, that hurt, things that cause you significant disruption, things that are hard. It's an increased ability to face those, to engage them, to carry them, and to come through that process having become more than you were when you started. Resiliency is largely about suffering, which we'll talk more as we go along through the night. It is not a path of avoiding suffering, it's a path of learning how to carry it. One of the things that to understand resiliency, you want to think about a triangle. And we have on the top of the triangle the idea of fragility. There is a fragileness that you can have. You could be a fragile person in some way. The thing about fragility is if that fragile thing experiences disruption, randomness, chaos, it harms it in a way that's not good. We often think about the opposite of that as being strength. And you'll often hear people say strength and resiliency as though they're synonyms, and they're not at all. Strength is when harm, chaos, randomness, those sort of things happen to the thing, and it doesn't notice it. It doesn't fundamentally change it. It doesn't do it any harm, but it doesn't change it either. Resiliency is when you have all that stuff happen, and it makes it better. So there's a way you can think about fragile and strength being non-fragility, but what resilience is anti-fragility. So think about the Hydra in Greek mythology.
What's a Hydra?
The Hydra was a multi-headed monster, right? There's an old story about a multi-headed monster. It has like 7 heads, and the warrior comes at it and cuts one of the heads off and thinks it's accomplished something great. But the Hydra would grow back 2 heads. and is even more powerful now. And then you cut off another head, and it grows back 2 heads. So every time you do the hydra harm, it comes back stronger. That's resiliency.
And also, I guess, why hydras are actually called hydras. Because all of, like, yeah, my biology classes came back in that one moment. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember messing with those guys. Yeah. So anyway, so why does resiliency matter to an entrepreneur, to a founder?
Yeah, great question. All of life includes the need for resiliency. It's very difficult to live in the world as it is without building a capacity for resiliency. And it's important to note that resiliency is not something that people are born with. We are born with a genetic code that allows us to engage in positive and negative emotions in a little bit different way. But fundamentally, a baby is fragile. Resiliency is something that's built in the same way that physical strength is built. A baby is born weak and goes through a series of things over time to build strength. Resiliency is the same thing. So all of life benefits from gaining an increased capacity to be resilient, to deal with the world as it is, the suffering that comes with it, in a way that actually helps you. The reason it's important in entrepreneurship is a version of life that is a full contact sport, and it will take you out. When you sign up for entrepreneurship, you are not signing up for a safe game. You're not signing up for something that's going to be easy. There is no easy button in life. It's even worse in entrepreneurship. What you're signing up for in entrepreneurship is a whole lot of shit. And you have to learn how to eat it. That's the key. The question is not, are you going to eat a shit sandwich? It's, what kind of shit do you want?
What flavor, you know?
Yeah. Now, I don't think it should be the protein in the sandwich, but it's definitely a condiment. Now, entrepreneurship is this thing where you're willfully deciding to engage closer to what we call in philosophy existential dread. And existential dread is the dread of existence itself. Now, we all build all kinds of internal mechanisms to pretend that's not real, but you're lying to yourself. There's a dread in existing. There's a problem, so to speak. There's a challenge to it. And when we're employees, we get to experience all of that too. But isn't it great that someone gives you a check every month or every 2 weeks consistently? That's a little bit of a cover. Somebody else is bearing the weight of the world as it is, just a little bit more than you are. There's nothing wrong with that. For most people, that's plenty and it's fine. But when you go in entrepreneurship, you're moving yourself closer to that problem. And you're going to get hit in the face a lot. And so building resiliency is not an option in entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. It's a requirement. And what's true, whether you want this to be true or not, is we use this to weed you out. Not everybody makes it. The people who are resilient make it. The people who figure this thing out make it. Doesn't matter how good your idea is, doesn't matter how smart you are. If you can't deal with reality as it is, reality will eat you for breakfast.
We saw that in a multi-$100 million way with that little story called Theranos.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And countless others, right?
Yeah. Oh, of course. Countless exactly. Others. Yeah. So for you Elizabeth Holmes fans out there, I do a killer impression of her, by the way.
Ooh.
But yeah.
Is it the lying about the money and the working part, or is it the just voice?
It's just the voice part
okay.
mainly.
All right.
Yeah. Like I was doing it the other day. I was like, dang, that's pretty good. That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, I
that
think
was
so.
the key, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And then you kind of purse your lips. But anyways, so yeah, sidetrack. I'm sorry. So can we just really quick go back to that triangle that you were talking about? What were the 3 primary points on the triangle?
So there's fragile, strength, which is non-fragility, and resilience, which is anti-fragility. Think about it this way. If you're, well, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that enough?
Yep. I just wanted you to kind of like verbalize those 3 points again. So
strength and resiliency are fundamentally different things. Strength doesn't experience the wound when it happens, the weight of the world, it just can carry it. That's a good thing to have. But you build that through resiliency. Resiliency is not being flexible enough not to get wounded. It's being wounded. It's being hurt and being made better through the process.
Yeah. You've kind of already touched on maybe what some people might think is misconceptions of resiliency, but like what have you seen as over your past 15 years of experience working with people that they're like, oh yeah, I'm resilient or something, but like what are common misconceptions or misplacements of resiliency that you've seen with people?
One of the things I love about this question is this is absolutely the kind of question you should just go Google, because it's everywhere out there. And there's a very long list of misconceptions because we have a lot of them. One of them I want to talk about is this, that it's something that you can learn and then have the benefits of the learning without the experience. There are things you can do with that. This is one that is definitely experiential knowledge. You can't learn enough about resiliency to not suffer, to not be wounded. You will be wounded. Resiliency is the willingness to go through that process. So anytime you're watching a video or listening to someone talk and they're teaching you tips, tricks, and hacks for resiliency, that's a shortcut for shortcut, right? What's the shortcut to resiliency? And there isn't one. It is not a thing you can speed up. You absolutely can slow it down. But it takes learning. It takes time. One of my favorite misconceptions about it is that resilient people never give up. They never quit. They have the ability to never quit. That's what it's about. And that's just not true at all. Resilient people actually learn that quitting is the most common thing you'll do. When you hear someone say, quitters never win and winners never quit, that's a profound half-truth. And there are certain things in life that's true of, but figuring out which one of those things in your life that's true of requires quitting everything else. So most of what you'll do in your process as entrepreneurs is quit things. Things will die, things will go away, things won't work. That'll be the vast majority of your experience. And so what resilient people learn to do is to quit almost everything so they can figure out what not to quit.
And that right there is a skill. Like once you learn that, holy smokes, game changer for certain. Now, can you tell us a story of when like your personal resiliency was heavily tested?
Yeah, I can.
Like one or two, not like all of them, but
I'll do a small one really quick because it's a view of the world that I get to see talking to entrepreneurs all the time. You might as well. And I hope it normalizes it. And I'll tell one that was more specific to me. But every time my company grows, or we get revenue goes up, or those sort of things, that feels good. I like that. But then every time a client raps with me before I thought we were done, or before I was ready to be done, or when I'm looking at my scoreboard, I'm like, oh, I hit my new goal, and then someone goes, hey, I want to take a pause, which always means they're done. And I lose a client, or I lose a company, or something like that happens. Every time that happens, a thought floats through my brain, which used to feel really, really true. Now it just floats through my brain of, oh, this is the beginning of the end. They finally figured it out. I've run out of, there's nobody else to
run out of dragons.
People, right? Yeah. And what I've learned about that one is, so it takes resiliency to not sit with that for days and days at a time. And you'll always have the thought, that's fine, but just letting it float by is important, because I have yet to meet an entrepreneur that doesn't have that thought. It's all about to end, right? It's common. Everybody's feeling that way and no one's talking about it. That's a little resiliency mechanism that you can go, oh yeah, that's normal, no worries, and then go back to doing what you do. The biggest one in my life, most profound lesson, it combined a personal problem, personal challenge, and a business challenge. It was early in my career. In my first career, I was involved in building materials and sold a ton of lumber and things like that. And I was doing that, but we had merged 3 companies together into one, which was on paper just brilliant. It was going to be amazing. In reality, we were a bunch of arrogant fools, and we didn't get along well, and it was a bit of a mess. In the midst of that challenge, and I wasn't showing up well at all, we also had our first son, who was born with a heart and lung condition. And that's a long story, but as my job is being threatened, I'm feeling very insecure, and I'm also making a mess of things at work. I also have a son who is now terminally ill. And those two things collided in a way that it was just the biggest, it's the hardest thing I've ever been through. And walking through that is one of those journeys I wouldn't wish on anybody. But the thing about it is I don't have to, because we all suffer in some way at some point. Nobody gets out of that. And so as I walked through that, and it was multiple years of navigating not only the career side of that, because I was in a position where if I lost my job, I lost my insurance. I lost my insurance, I went bankrupt. So the highest stakes on job. Plus I hate my job. Plus I'm being a jerk at my job because I'm so stressed out.
That's the trifecta.
And so as we came through that experience, I learned more about resiliency through that one experience than anything else, and how I wanted to show up the next time I got punched in the face by the universe.
So what are some like successful traits that you've seen in founders, business owners, leaders, with both kind of like resiliency, but also expanding that to mindset too? So like what are kind of like some maybe mental traits that you've seen from people that have been truly successful in what they're building and doing?
Yeah, let me sort of share that in the form of a story for a second. A number of years ago, I was working with a corporate executive, and he was rising in his company, and he had gotten himself into a position where he was the number 2 of a fast-growing company, and the owner was really setting him up to be the CEO, and everything was great. Everything was great. And so we were working through leadership things and how do you navigate that kind of climb, and how do you lead a company that's doing that kind of volume and that kind of stuff. Then he found out that the owner suddenly wanted to sell the company, and we wanted to buy it. Right? Great, we'll buy it. And it went from it was valuation about $25 million at the time. That was doable. Somebody came in with a $50 million number. That was not within our grasp. And so he lost this dream, and probably maybe going to lose his job in the process with that buyer. But then that one didn't work out. Did sell for about $110 million about a year later. So this rapid expansion of value and the growth, and he was key to all of that. It was bought by a private equity company. So we went from being in this position of having a lot of exciting things happening and growth and opportunity, to having that maximize into, I'm going to buy this company, to having that lost, to then being bought by a private equity firm with a ton of uncertainty involved in that. Then he got into a rather significant and challenging battle in that purchase, which is too many details in his story to tell, but everybody lawyered up, and it got really, really contentious. And one of the principles we teach is that there's always a nuclear button in every negotiation.
That's true.
And you got to figure out where it is so you don't trip over it one day, because this stuff gets really stressful and it's really intense, and there are moments when people find themselves reaching out to hit the nuclear button and it's the wrong time. So we identified where that was, and we definitely had one. We definitely had a nuclear button. And in the end, we hit it. Mutually assured destruction. Take everyone out, right?
Pick up the red phone.
Yeah. So it got really, 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 really intense. And right as we were about to hit the button, I just have to sit in the back and watch.
Do it, like that's your thing.
No, it's not my call. Anyway, this guy is going through this whole journey of these ups and highs and lows and this and promises of this money and that money. And in the end, it came down to this final negotiation and a willingness to actually hit that button. And that unlocked it. And we spent about 3 days in this existential dread, this terror that the whole thing was going to fall apart. All futures were going to get lost, and his potential future in this industry was going to be sullied, all the things. And then about a week later, he gets a huge check in the mail, which was what we were negotiating for. Then it all works out. Now he's got mountains of money, and it's amazing. And the private equity firm is like, "Oh yeah, that's totally normal. This is fine. Come on into the new business." So he's totally winning again.
Yeah.
Huh. But if I could take you into those conversations, imagine how hard these multiple months actually were, and how solidly he had to sort out who he was and who he wanted to be and how he wanted to show up. What was right? What was wrong? What was he willing to do? I mean, and then doing that, and then lawyering up with big lawyers out of San Francisco, and it's intense. It's a full contact sport, and the guys on the other side of the equation are not messing around because there's millions and millions and millions of dollars involved. So then he goes work for the new company, and I won't tell you the whole story again. But then everything falls apart again, and he ends up exiting that company. Because none of that worked. So then he finds himself in a non-compete, year-long, can't work in the industry, blah, blah, blah. So he's just sitting around, does some stuff. But then he starts another business, which we're now working on. So now we're building this new business, and that's really exciting. But growth eats cash. So now we're out of cash again. Right? Okay, so this guy has been cycling through what you would pretty highs and lows on his journey. And the whole time he's been able to stay consistent to what he's trying to build and what he's trying to do, because he has a high level of resiliency. And what he's able to do, or one way to think, there's a lot of key principles we could talk about in resiliency, but what I would say he's able to do is, number one, he expects to suffer. He's not trying to avoid it. He just knows it's part of the gig. I heard a venture capitalist recently talk about the entrepreneurs that they love to put money in, the ones that they can, when they're vetting that out and they're looking at it, he described it as finding the ones who can eat glass over and over again. Right? Now that sounds terrible. I know we're here to be inspired and all of that. We'll get to that later. That's Katie's job.
Glass is delicious. Don't worry. It's fine. It's fine.
But what he means by that is this capacity to make really difficult, complex decisions that are high stakes over and over and over, running from one dilemma to the next over and over and over. And this guy knew that that was part of the gig. So all of these things that kept happening to him weren't outside of his expectations. They were just things that were happening. That's one.
So setting solid expectations of what you're going to go through.
Understanding that I'm going to suffer. And then you can downgrade suffering, like some of it's just hardship and some of it's just mildly inconvenient, fine. But I'm going to experience things that are difficult. The second one is those experiences cause us to have negative emotions. And highly resilient people aren't surprised by that either. Resiliency is not having a consistent flood of positive emotions. In fact, in happiness studies, happiness isn't having a consistent flood of positive emotions. Happiness actually requires some negative emotion. That has to be part of the equation. And so what highly resilient people do is they know how to engage negative emotions without being overwhelmed by them. And then more importantly, they know how to engage positive emotions without losing track of them. Because the human, in its natural state, leans negative. In psychology, it's called a negative bias. And we have it for a reason. It's actually a pretty important reason. But what highly resilient people do is they're able to tweak their brains, this is the mindset bit, back into a slight bias towards positivity without going all the way into I can only have positive emotions. That's an avoidance mechanism that doesn't work. So you can actually, you don't have a positive mental attitude, you build one. If you want to learn more about that, Google Velcro and Teflon. That'll take you to Dr. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. But he's done the research on this, and there's actually a really, really simple mechanism that if you do over and over and over again, your capacity to engage positive emotions will go up and your brain will hold it. You will actually rework your brain into that space. So the ability to engage negative emotions and positive ones in the right balance is highly, highly correlated with people who are resilient people.
No, I think that people in Reading have really good practice doing that because we survive the 118 degree summers. And so then that's why we're so much happier now because we're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
And what do we say? It's a dry heat.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's the thing on display.
Yes. I always call it the weeding season because I'm like, hey, if you're not going to deal with this weather and you're going to complain about it all the time, you can leave. I don't want your traffic here anyways. Yeah. So see, we've already all have practice with it. Even if you're like, I haven't jumped into the business sector yet, you're already well practiced. So
the third one I want to share is, these are all interconnected, but the third one is people that are capable of being highly resilient and have a practiced ability to what in Ikon we call it locating reality as it is. That's the line we often talk about. They have this flexible, open mindset. They're able to come to conclusions when it's helpful, but they're able to suspend the conclusions, which is most often helpful. So they don't just have this open mind that never, ever, ever comes to a conclusion. You can't make decisions if you're doing that. But they're able to navigate between those. They're able to see something and walk around it and look at it from multiple angles. And in doing so, they can find out what's really going on. And so much of what we do that causes us the pain and suffering that we experience is because we're not able to do that. And so we get overwhelmed by negative experiences that actually aren't necessary. One author says that there's a necessary suffering and an unnecessary suffering. He says these numbers aren't real, it's for the point. He says 90% of the suffering in all the world is unnecessary, but 10% of it is. And the 10% is caused by people trying to avoid, the 90% is caused by people trying to avoid the 10%, right? The ability to locate reality is a unfair competitive advantage in leadership, to actually see what's going on. Now, to be clear, you cannot actually locate reality. It's way too big and complex. You can do it better in groups, but even then you can't. So we like to say reality is a lot like the sun. It's impossible to stare at, but it's very illuminating.
So what were those three points?
They expect to suffer. They know it's part of the gig.
Yep.
They're able to deal with negative and positive emotions appropriately, and they have a heightened ability to locate reality as it is.
Yeah. Love that. So I have one more question here, and then we'll dive into whatever you guys want to throw Kirk's way. So basically, how can entrepreneurs turn their personal development into like a strategic advantage in business?
Okay, this question is actually core to what we call the Ikon framework, or what we're doing as coaches. And I'll do this really quick, and we can talk more about it later if you want to. But we believe that it's somewhat increasingly self-evident that in the modern economy, the means of production, which is an economic term for how value is created, that is increasingly showing up in how you deliver yourself to the market. And you can show this over about 120 years of really great industrial psychology research as we came out of and through the Industrial Revolution, where it was all about the machine, the raw materials, having capital in the factories. And what humans were doing then was tending or repairing machines. And so a lot of what we were actually treated as parts of the machine. But over time, we began to realize that's not the case. So who you are is actually one of the necessary components of creating value in the modern economy. And that's not true for everybody everywhere, but it's true for people when work, the nature of work, has got increasingly complex and requires creativity and innovation. And for almost all of human history, most people did work that was simple and repetitive. And if work is simple and repetitive, you're kind of just a part of the machine. But when work is complex and requires creativity and innovation, you are a necessary component. So, personal development is now no longer optional. Because if you're not developing yourself in your ability to be resilient, to have strength, your ability to see how the world works and engage it, your ability to suffer and be made better from it, your ability to eat glass on days you need to eat glass, your ability to do that is now what I would consider an unfair competitive advantage in the marketplace. So we call it your value creation mechanism. And there's a thing that you have that is unique to you. For you, it's the sledgehammer, right?
I like to wield it, yes.
It's a value creation mechanism, isn't it?
Yes.
And sometimes you can destroy the world with it.
Yeah.
It's that powerful, right?
I know.
Yeah.
You have to be careful.
You do, right? Timing matters.
Oh, yes, it does.
So we all have this thing called a value creation mechanism. It's a way of understanding how you uniquely create value, and the degree to which you can figure out what that is and really become a craftsperson of it will have a huge impact on how you're able to come to market, what entrepreneurship looks like for you, simply how you're going to create value. And what's interesting about a value creation mechanism is it's the thing you have in abundance. And a lot of people like to talk about abundance and like to talk about not having a scarcity mentality, but that's crazy. You absolutely need to maintain a scarcity mentality because you don't have access to everything, you have access to something. And when you combine the concept of abundance, the thing that you have in abundance, and you do the subtractive work of letting all the rest of it go, what you get to is potency. And that is a strategic advantage in any business activity in today's market.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to continue to capitalize on your time, but I'll let these guys. Thank you for this conversation, and you're still in the hot seat though. So
right.
yeah. So who has questions for Kirk? Okay. David, I saw you first.
I've already established that I don't know is one of my available answers, right?
Thank you for that information. Very powerful. In your negotiation with that $50 million to $110 million deal, you mentioned the nuclear button. I think that was a great metaphor. And then you said you actually hit it and it unlocked something, and then whatever happened after that. But I was curious, what what was that nuclear button in that negotiation?
That's a story for someone else to tell. Yeah. So, no. Those are all client stories inside of their files and things like that. I can tell you though that that in most high stake deals it exists, and the definition of a nuclear button is where it kills you, but I die too. And in a negotiation, the most powerful position you can take is a willingness to die without killing you. Right? First one to die wins in these negotiations. You have to figure out what that means, because I don't mean doormat. I don't mean giving up. I mean, it's more of a Klingon approach. Klingons in Star Trek is for those of you that don't know, Klingons are the warrior element of the human experience, amplified in Star Trek, and they go into battle all the time. And the reason they're so feared in battle is they have a daily ritual where they say, "Today's a good day to die." And in a lot of what we're doing in life, it's not being willing to surrender and see victory in it, not being willing to actually lay our lives down in particular ways, that causes these relationships to break down. If you want a good example of that, the book, Covey has a book called The Speed of Trust. And he talks about how fast business can move when there's trust involved. It's such a profound idea that I would say trust is the fabric of everything. Once you have enough to eat and you're not scared for your life, trust is what's left. Our whole economy is built on trust. Money is not even real. It's just we are playing a game called trust, right? And so if you're negotiating without that in mind, you're not as powerful as you could be. Does that help? Okay, cool.
Hi.
Hello.
So, I love what you were talking about the things that people don't actually talk about in entrepreneurship, but everybody's like, "Oh, it's awesome! You can do it. Go for it. It's gonna be so much fun." But I guess so for me, I'm not a normal person. I've had a really crazy life ever since I moved to California. And yeah, it's trippy mountain up north. I guess what I want to say is, how do you translate wild creativity into marketable ideas that form a successful business?
Right.
Because that's what I've been thinking about. And
that's a great question, because wild and crazy ideas are now a necessary component of value creation. Right? That's one of the cool things. We're coming in as the human became increasingly important. The left brain activity, the analytical side of our brains did first, but there was a body of work done about 15 years ago that was all categorized as the rise of the right brain, and we're starting to put that's become a necessary component. All right, and here's how you do it. That's a how question. I knew it was coming. I set myself up. Some of the things that gets us in trouble when trying to do that, I'll put it that way. Some of the pitfalls of creativity is the belief that it has to come from inspiration that is out of my control, and that restraints and limits aren't helpful. That when I'm at my fullest and pure creativity, I'm living in a limitless place. But in fact, restraint and limit is one of the necessary features of creativity. Creativity is, one author is asked, do you write under inspiration? And he says, oh, absolutely. And fortunately, it shows up every morning at 8 a.m. at my desk. Creativity is an innate human characteristic. There's two versions of it. There's what we call creative 1 and creative 2. And the creative 2 is that out of this world Mozart sort of thing, and we all know stories of people who are like that, and they're very much the anomaly. And if you're like that, then what I'm saying doesn't apply to you. It's fine, be like that. But most of us are a version of creative that is embedded in all humans. All humans are creative. Stifled humans struggle with it. And so one of the things that we do as stifled humans to try to not deal with the weight of creativity is we pretend that we need to be inspired externally and we live in a limitless world. I don't think that's true. So if you want to get big ideas, into action, into reality, what you have to do is put them in the way of real customers who are really going to give you real feedback. And it breaks our heart when that happens, because it's a creative idea that you fell in love with and all that kind of stuff. But that's one of those death processes I was talking about. And as we learn to take the big ideal ideas, bring them into reality, they get tarnished. But they also get to be real. And an unobtainium just actually doesn't exist. And so it's that work of taking creativity and putting it in front of people and getting it critiqued, getting customer feedback, customer validation. If you want it in the market, that's the key of doing that.
And you can practice that at the start.
And we're back. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Hi, you'd mentioned that the majority of value creation is shifting from just the means of production into the way that you show up to market. Could you compare and contrast that from branding?
From what?
Could you compare and contrast the way that you show up to the market with branding?
So branding is a particular messaging mechanism that we use to articulate in communicable ways that are relatively simple something that is deeply held, right? So if you think about a brand, I used to teach branding at a business, or not branding, marketing at a business school. And there'd be all these people and they say, oh, I hate marketing, blah, 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 I don't like marketing, because they have such a high degree of encounter with inauthentic marketing. So when Coke says enjoy, and shows polar bears and all that kind of stuff, that's not actually what Coke's offering, right? So it's incongruent, and it becomes very visible as, well, that's just marketing. But great marketing, great branding is when you experience the thing at a symbol level, at a slogan level, at a mission level, as a first paragraph level, as a walking in the door, touching the thing level, in the product itself, and then when you meet the people who founded it, and there's congruency in the whole thing. When that happens, we don't call it marketing anymore, right? In fact, we wear those brands. We love those brands. And we love to tell those stories. It's just true. No, it's marketing, right? So branding that is built on this notion of showing up as a version that you actually are, the best version of yourself possible, doing it for the benefit of others, is just a small touch of telling that deeper story. And you want to keep that whole stack in alignment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got like 2 more questions. Let's give this side of the room some love.
Thank you for being here, by the way, to
Yeah.
glean from your 15 years of experience.
Yeah, I've been doing this for
Wow.
about 15 years.
That is amazing. So I kind of missed something in the beginning. You said that you don't do how.
Yeah.
So can you summarize what do you do?
That is a fair question. If you think about the idea that you've probably heard it said, life's a journey, and I think that's not a metaphor. I think that's what life is, right? But I think a life well lived is an adventure, and adventures cost us something, right? There's challenge and struggle and all that stuff I was talking about. There's also mountaintops that we climb, and there's all this good stuff along the way, and so adventures are great. And wouldn't it be great if you're going on an adventure, going to go climb some big mountaintop called entrepreneurship, and somebody could come alongside you and tell you how to get there? It'd be awesome, right? The problem is, or what they might do is hand you a map. Here's the map. And maps are fantastic. But maps need a little bit more information to be useful. Because if I was a dirtbag and I clacked you on the head and threw you in my creeper van and drove around the West for 3.5 days and pushed you out and handed you a map and then drove off, that map has no value to you at all. Because you want to know, how do I get home?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you have to figure out is, where are you? And that's question number 1 that we play with. Where are you? And that's an act in the lived experience of locating reality. How good are you at figuring out where you actually are? And it turns out most of us are less good at that than we hope. And then when we're going through significant transitions, we're not where we used to be, and we don't really know it yet. So we have to do this work of locating reality, which is the where are you question. So now if you have a map and you know where you are, that's helpful. But then where are you going emerges. And that's the what do you want question. And if you don't know where you are and where you're going, a map has no value. The how has no value. So the what do you want question has to do with motivation and desire and goal setting and all that kind of stuff. But we like to think of that as the second hardest question in the world, and most of us treat it like a fun game to ask people around a campfire. Like, what are your dreams? And then you tell them, and you're like, that's amazing, go for it. But they said something like, I want to change the world. What does that mean, right? So the what do you want question is deeply vulnerable to answer. Very difficult. And so we work on that. But then once you know that, you know where you are and where you're going, but there's multiple routes to get there. So we have to figure out what kind of vehicle is doing the traveling, which is you. Who are you and what are you all about? And the reason that matters is because if you're a Porsche and we send you down a Jeep trail, we've made a terrible mistake. But if you're a Jeep and we send you down a Porsche track, you'll eventually get there, but you're going to lose, right? And it turns out speed still matters. And so that kind of a question, what's your value creation mechanism? How are you going after this? That really, really matters. And I have a lot of people that I work with who are trying to go after something that they read in a book, heard in a podcast, is possible, but they are not ready or designed for it, or one of the two. And we are very often working them into where they actually want to go. And it's often completely different than what they came in looking for. So if I answer a how question early, I don't think of them as how questions. I think of them as fear questions.
Wow.
If you could tell me how to get there, and then there's a little asterisk in the contract, and guarantee the results, I'll take all the risks necessary. And I can't de-risk it for you like that. But if we locate where you are, where you actually want to go, and the route that you will take, I would suggest how becomes inevitable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Can I ask one more question? Just quick. Okay. So I would love to know, when you go through like pain and suffering and disappointments, like what's your process to digest all those?
That is not a quick one. I drink heavily. I would love to talk more about that with you when we have more time.
So you mentioned this early in the beginning that you help companies transition. One of the things you mentioned is you help them transition from also thinking one way unto another.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you give people in companies leadership? Do you actually give them guardrails when they transition to a new way of thinking, pattern, behavior, tendency, on how to not accidentally fall back in an old pattern?
No. No, that's not how it works. And wouldn't it be great if it did? Can I end with a poem?
Yes.
Here. This will take a minute. This is a good end for this, because that's a great question.
Everybody has to snap at the end, okay? So.
Let's see if I can get it up quick. If not, I will pass.
Right.
All right. Come on. It's loading. I know. We'll edit this out, right? All right, here we go.
Chris.
So this is, I didn't write this. I wish I did. It's awesome. This was written by Portia. I don't have her last name here. This story is called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down a different street. Repeat.
Oh, you get snaps for that one.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Kirk, for sharing so